Brought to you by MuleSoft, provider of the industry-leading Anypoint platform for APIs.
So yeah, dogfooding your API. A little bit of story before we begin. So I'm from Kaltura. It's an open source video platform. And we started out at February 1st, 2007. Actually, we started off at June 2006, and it took us a while to understand what we want to do. The very early thing that we came to a conclusion, and one of the co-founders who was back then the CTO, Shai David, and now the CRO of the company, he basically said one thing. It doesn't really matter what we'll end up doing, and we'll start with something and we'll probably evolve over time. The only thing that really matters is strong APIs. Don't do anything else. We don't really care about the applications. Those will be changing. And surely soon enough, we needed to launch something because that's what happens when you take somebody else's money. So crunch time. Crunch time was a little bit a month after we started building. And well, we started by launching a platform that basically allowed consumers to edit videos together. So it was kind of a mixture of Wikipedia and YouTube, right? So a way for people from all over the world to collaborate on creating videos. So very much a B2C website, kind of a hybrid of YouTube and Wikipedia. And so we launched, and then soon after we launched, about 2 weeks, companies came to us saying, hey, this is a really neat technology. How can we actually white label this and put it on our website? So we got inquiries from all over the world, including governments, governments that want to increase their participation and so on, including new startups that want to build interactive and collaborative experiences. So we started off kind of answering to those demands from customers and evolving very quickly from a B2C website to a B2B platform. Very quickly to find out all of them actually have requirements. And those requirements are often very, very different from one another. So for example, a customer from an enterprise came to us saying, hey, we're using SharePoint, and SharePoint is our asset management system. And back then, they didn't really understand what asset management meant. It was basically the website. And we want to use video on SharePoint. So how can we put your stuff on SharePoint? And 2 weeks afterwards, another one came in and said, hey, we're using Moodle for our learning management system in university. How can we embed videos onto that system and build an e-learning platform? And that's basically how things evolve, right? Then it gets into the place where customers are actually asking for their own custom workflows. So we have thousands of editors all over the world. Those editors are editing videos all the time for hundreds of thousands stores all around the world. But we also need some kind of moderation tools to say, this video is not approved. How do we do that? But this is extremely different than the use case of that education, of that university that basically used Kaltura, and very, very different from that other government that basically just used it to launch a website to increase participation. So what do we do? The solution was actually given around, if I'm not mistaken, the year of 2000 by some really interesting dude. Let's see if any of you actually recognizes this. So it's basically a mandate inside of a company by the CEO of that company saying that all teams from now on will be using APIs, period. If you're not using APIs, internally, externally, it doesn't matter what technology, you will be fired. And they were fired. So who was that? Anybody knows? Amazon, right. Neat dude. So a big asshole for many people's accounts, but he had something right. He figured out very early on that while APIs are not something new, right? Microsoft have been doing APIs for like 30 years before. But what is new is the web, and the web basically brought with it a new nature for APIs. So before we go back into that a little bit, let's just throw some big words on the screen so we'll feel more kind of relevant and smart. I'm definitely sure you know all of that. But essentially, the web brought with it a lot of new advantages and a lot of new expectations from your consumers. And your consumers can be partners, your consumers can be developers, your consumers can be users. Doesn't really matter. But what matters is all those, right? The web is at its core is democratizing all technology. Doesn't really matter. And APIs are at the core of it. But what makes those APIs important is the fact that they're open. So if that happened in 2000, and we've evolved a lot from then, why is this still the situation? A lot of enterprise APIs, and not even enterprise APIs, a lot of even consumer APIs, are still looking like this. You have a form, you go on, you sign up, someone from BizDev contacts you, asks you a lot of questions about what you're going to do with it. You wait a few weeks for a decision from them, you don't really know why, don't really know what they're evaluating even. You sign legal agreements, which you don't really bother reading. And if you do, then you probably have a lawyer that will take another 2 weeks to just review them. Then you need to pay a lot of money in some cases. You get API access. You need to spend a few weeks learning and training on it. And sometimes there is even a time period which they force you on. And only then you start building. How many people actually go through this process? I beg to say about 10% finish it. So this is the world that we should be in. But of course, you already knew that. So why are we still in that dreaded situation? This is an example of Kaltura. This is how Kaltura was architected back in 2007. When we looked at what we're going to solve, which was back then, and still even today evolving, but back then a very hard problem to solve because it included a lot of different technologies. Some of those technologies were proprietary, some of those technologies were open source. There were not a lot of standards in the market, so the solutions were evolving very rapidly. One quick example is, the world was basically based on Adobe Flash, and then suddenly Steve Jobs comes in and declares war on Flash, and there's no Flash anymore. So now everybody needs to reconvert their videos and think about new ways to distribute them. So what do you do? So we sat down and we were thinking, what should be the architecture of this platform? How are we going to solve all those problems? How are we going to make them scale? And it's basically what we came up with. Was basically an architecture where everything is driven from the same API layer, whether it's inside our infrastructure or it's outside our infrastructure. So those would be applications like the video player or a video portal like a do-it-yourself YouTube, for example, right? So applications that we build or applications that our customers build or applications that our partners will build, they're all going to be on the same set of APIs. There's not going to be any coupling. We won't going to have any backdoors. So whatever a developer of Kaltura will do, our partners can do and our customers can do, and so will users of our open source community will be able to do. So, granted, being open source enabled us to also do some more get some more flexibility in that field by basically saying, hey, even the core is open, so feel free to go in. But by maintaining this mandate of basically everything has to go through the same set of APIs, even when somebody from the open source community wanted to go in and extend the infrastructure and say, let's add a new encoder, it would be much simpler for them to do because they had to work with the same APIs. They didn't need to go in to turn the guts of the system upside down just to understand how to write this plugin. They would just integrate with the same APIs. Another layer that was very important for us is the ability, and again, that was back in 2007 before there was a lot of noise with stuff like RAML, for example. But one thing that was also very important for us is the ability to basically touch users or developers, in our case, in whatever platform they're using. So if you're using Flash, then we'll have client libraries for you in Flash. If you're using C#, we'll have client libraries for you to use in C#. Or if you're simply a Linux guy that likes the command line and likes to heat code through Bash, then we'll have a client for you in Bash. So it was very important for us to simplify the way that developers get started with the system. And there are a lot of different components to this simplification, which we'll talk about, but essentially at the core of it is reaching your users wherever they are, right? So even developers are just like end users. They have their own environments, their own expectations, their own set of learning tools, their own things that they're used to. So why force them to a custom API that you've invented? Why not just reach them with whatever language they're used to? So we also came up with this concept of evolution. Right? A big problem that we came across with any API, from the days of Microsoft to Facebook, was that you get started writing your application, and then 2 weeks later, the provider decided to introduce a new set of APIs and completely deprecate the old ones. Screw that. What do I do now? I've already launched my application. I already have users using it. What happens now? So a very core decision that we've made was we're not going to break our customer's application. And that's a really, really big decision to make because, well, how do I evolve without telling my customers to not deprecate what they're doing? Other two things that you kind of expect from an API, but a lot of them don't necessarily actually take into seriously is obviously naming conventions, but the bigger one is consistent behavior. So even we talked a lot about those different client libraries. Even across those different client libraries, come up with some sort of a common denominator in terms of how do I use the API. So if I'm using Flash, or if I'm using JavaScript, or if I'm using C# or PHP, there should be a same kind of general behavior of the client library, of how do I interact with it. So what concepts are you going to look at? So for example, for us, we decided that we'll basically go with the facade kind of approach, where basically the client library will turn into a facade. You'll instantiate the client library once and then make calls through the client library. So it doesn't matter which language you're looking at. For example, if you find a sample code that someone wrote in C#, it would be really easy for you to translate it into whatever language you're using, because it's the same format, the same concepts. The other thing is accessibility and simplicity. So there are a few concepts over here that we kind of took into account when we tried working it. One was standards. We were living back in 2007 at a time where standards are constantly evolving around video. There was no real standard for delivering the video on the web. There was no real standard of a codec. Actually, even today, there's not a decision on which codec people should use. So standards are nice, but don't really be afraid of breaking them, because sometimes you'll need to evolve the standards yourself. SOAP was very prevalent then. A lot of the developers we worked with were very used to simply plugging in a URL of a SOAP description and getting a client library out of that. Fine. But what happens with SOAP? It's a really complicated, really heavy environment. So you need to have a client library that doesn't really scale that well. And for example, if you're building a client application like a video player that needs to load very fast, then you're screwed. So we actually chose to go with REST, which wasn't all that used back then, but today it became a standard. So really, don't be afraid to break or ignore some standards. Obviously, standards are important, but think for yourself, and if needed, even reinvent them. Workflows. Another core decision that we made was APIs will be atomic. So operations should be as atomic as possible. For example, if I want to upload a video, there should be an upload operation that uploads the video from my computer to the server. And there should be another request that converts that video. And there should be another request that basically connects that video with metadata. And the reason those are atomic, and it sounds at first as if, well, why would you complicate it? Why would you introduce so many different atomic APIs and make life harder? The reason for that is because if you think back at the first slide, there are all sorts of different workflows, all sorts of different expectations, and you want to enable them all. You want to encourage innovation around your platform. You want to encourage your users to basically break it down and do whatever they want. So build atomic APIs, and in order to simplify those workflows and create custom workflows or introduce some best practice workflows, create a multi-request. And so we introduced a multi-request API that basically wraps atomic APIs together, sends it off at one request. Then this allows you the ability to basically simplify best practices. So if you do come up with workflows that are across the board very similar to each other, you can simply incorporate them into your client libraries. So this is a best practice workflow. This is how you can do it. You don't have to. There's a helper function in the client library, for example. But it still allows you to go in atomically and build your own custom workflow if you need to. The other one is about doing operations seamlessly. So there are some things that you care a lot about as the architect of your platform, as the developer of your system, but really your customers, your API consumers couldn't care less about. Caching, great. I want to know it's there. I want to know the system is scalable. I don't want to deal with it. Don't want to understand how your caching works. Don't need to. Learn it, right? So another a very important decision is to basically simplify some of those workflows in a manner that, for example, security matters a lot, but there should be a really easy way to get started. Which brings us to the, next one, which is be mindful. Don't assume people want to learn your platform. That's very key. Because across the board, APIs are really complicated. For example, for us, we've ended up over the years with like 700 different APIs because every one of them is atomic, right? Don't assume people want to read. Don't assume people want to learn. They don't. They don't have the time. All they want is there's a developer somewhere sitting down, getting commands from his boss saying, I need this workflow built by tomorrow. What he wants to do is being able to go into Google, write down description of the workflow he wants to build, and get a result. And that's it. Some of them even want to just copy-paste it into their application. So try and build your solutions to be that, to be friendly in a way that, for example, an API console is a tool for that. So API consoles allow you to basically go in and select actions and plug in dummy data or even connect it to your account and then get a result just to see how things work without writing code. But have that API console also generate some general practice code examples. So I don't need to go in and read a lot of documentations just to understand how to make that call. I can simply check it, hit run, and get the example running. And Google does it quite well now. So from our perspective, what is next for us? When we said, it's been 8 years or so now. We've had Over 600 universities use the system and build their own custom workflow. Pretty much every one of the Fortune 50. A lot of different custom workflows from media companies. And you can imagine how different the use cases tend to be. We have customers using Kaltura on airplanes and customers using Kaltura in hospitals. Very different workflows, very different requirements. How do we make them happen? And how do we keep on evolving and building the system? So one key element that we're now focused on is a university. What we're starting to see is an ecosystem built around our platform in a way that there are partner companies who are basically system integrators that want to build applications for other customers. So customers will come to us saying, hey, is there a certified developer on your platform that I can work with? You know, who's using those kind of technologies with Kaltura? So a key component moving forward would basically be building kind of a Khan Academy based on our APIs. So it's nice to have those documentation sets, a knowledge center. It's nice to have a test console that you can go in and try out and everything. But at the end of the day, how do I train developers to become certified on it? And really grow the ecosystem to that level. So university is something that we're looking at right now very seriously, and we'll probably start launching soon some early versions of it that will probably also incorporate some combination of videos and quizzes, just like you're used from Udacity and so on. But they're also going to be in collaboration with our customers. So this is something key. Is, for example, working with universities that are our customers that are using our system to also certify students, to incorporate them as part of their learning. Business platform as a service. Who here doesn't know what that means? Oh, that's nice. All right, so business processes management is a big topic in enterprise, has been for a while now. What we're seeing more and more of is a connection of it with APIs. But essentially, business, for those who don't know, business processes as a service is kind of a concept that allows CIOs and so on, so allows basically business users to optimize processes across the enterprise. So if there's a supply chain, the ability to basically define different states and different workflows within the enterprise and what happens across them, getting analytics across those workflows, and then going in and changing those workflows easily. But a key thing here is being able to define those workflows without writing code. So how do we create workflows? How do we leverage all the atomic operations that we've mentioned before and all the different abilities to create different workflows and customize experiences without writing a single line of code? And that's going to be a big thing moving forward because as your platform becomes more flexible, as your platform becomes more widely used, more business users will start caring about it in a way that they want to build their own workflows. So this is a big step for us moving forward as well. The next thing is kind of a next generation of documentation. It's the ability to create adaptive documents. Something that RAML is kind of getting into very nicely now. And we're looking very seriously at RAML as a type of solution for that. But essentially the ability to combine both your crowd, so both your community of developers and what they do and how they kind of bubble up those best practices, but also the ability to push those best practices in a centralized manner where if there is a new API to use that is better than the existing API, then how do you push that forward? Which brings us to more stuff like faster personalized onboarding. With so many APIs, how do you get started? So be very mindful to basically, who's the type of customer? Which industry are they coming from? What is their use case? And then based on that, present the workflows and the APIs that you know are generally being used by those customers. And that's something that we're doing more and more of, both from a customer success perspective, so people who are working with the customers as consultants and so on, but as well as in automated fashion. So the customer will be able to go into the knowledge center, and the knowledge center automatically will identify where they are, where they're coming from, what industry, which customer, or who they are, and based on their history, present the right things to do, or start recommending different workflows to improve their existing operations with Kaltura. All right, so let's summarize a little bit. What we talked about is basically, obviously, what you already knew, but sadly, a lot is not being really implemented. So the first thing is be a platform. Build APIs first, applications second. Take seriously what Bezos from Amazon told his team. Don't build applications, build APIs. Then build the applications on top of those APIs, and even internally, right? So if you have a backend operation that runs periodically, there's no reason for that operation to run with like a tightly coupled code, because it breaks and it doesn't scale. It's not failover. It doesn't really help you in any way. It may take you, a week earlier in the release, but in reality, it will break very fast. So by building those APIs first and then building your operations, whether they're backend operations or applications, you're basically setting yourself for success. No backdoors, like we said. So I think no backdoors is also important from the fact of be just your own users. I can't explain how many APIs over the years I've used that simply didn't work. And the reason they didn't work is because that company was building applications without their APIs, and their APIs would break, and that's like, well, okay, so let's call the product manager of that API. And that's just bad. It's bad user experience for your users. If you're building something, you're not using it yourself, might as well just go home. Distributed scale. So we talked about the backend processes, right? So when you write backend processes, make sure that they're based on those APIs. Or build APIs for those backend processes. For example, in Kaltura, the transcoding engines are just API applications. They're basically using the same APIs that, as the customer, you would be able to use to build a distributed transcoder somewhere else. But it allowed us to introduce integrations and abstraction layers over a lot of different transcoders over the years, but it also allowed us to scale it very, very quickly and to be able to take Kaltura from a completely software as a service environment where we hosted to our customers to self-hosted environment and to hybrid environments where we can basically ingest on one server, transcode on another server, and then scale transcoding on peak time on Amazon, for example. So API really can serve as your core for distributed scale. A really key component is really nobody cares, so make it seamless, make it easy to get started. Nobody reads, so make it literal. So many different APIs don't really make sense. If the action is upload, just call it upload. Don't call it ingest or whatever. Just call it upload. Call it what it is. Be literal as you can, as if you're talking to your grandma. If she can understand it, your developers will understand it. So be literal. And remove all barriers for participation. Really, those lawyers are redundant. Seriously. Just get started. Put up a form. Let them start. Open your APIs. Let them actually try it out before they sign anything. Who cares? What will happen if they'll use your APIs without signing those documents? Nothing. Just let them start. Sit it out as much as possible. Open source the client libraries. There are all sorts of open source licenses that can allow you to still maintain obviously you maintain your IP, even if it's open source, but there are some certain of open source licenses will allow you to maintain control over the distribution of the SDK, if that's as important. But really think hard and long about what are the barriers to get started with your system, and then go in and attack each of them. Atomic APIs, automation with multi-requests, and also caching on multi-requests, by the way. And then use the right technology for the right situation or the right customer. Really, you don't really need to force anyone today to a specific technology. There are all sorts of technology. They all have different use cases, different environments.
Brought to you by MuleSoft, provider of the industry-leading Anypoint platform for APIs.